Welcome back to the 90s. Last we left off, Shonen Jump had entered the new decade in a major way, giving us huge classics like YuYu Hakusho and Slam Dunk. 1991, in comparison, wouldn't be quite as big, only giving us 10 new series, but there's some very interesting ones among them, and other developments this year that make it as exciting as the last. So without any more delay, let's rush headlong into the year 1991. Dio is within arm's reach now as the Stardust Crusaders have reached Egypt. First, they'd need to get to Cairo, and a handful of exceedingly strong stand users stand in their way. Is what I'd love to say, but the very first few are actually pretty funny, to be honest. JoJo at this time had evolved from simple stand versus stand showdowns, crafting more intricate set pieces and problems for the Crusaders to solve. The first stand of 1991 being a great example, Bast and its stand user Mariah. This might be one of my favourite arcs of the part, seeing Joseph touch a random electricity socket near an outdoor toilet, which puts him at the mercy of Bast's magnetic powers. We then watch as Joseph is hounded by anything magnetic in some great comedy bits. He's chased by cutlery, stalked by an elderly woman who thinks he was flirting with her, and best of all, Avdol gets involved in one of the most funny and homoerotic scenes of the whole series, where the two get stuck together. Seeing them have to work together to take out Mariah is a joy though, with her being one of my favourite stand user enemies, her expressions being the highlight for me. Alessi and their stand set would be next, being a slightly less light-hearted but still being a lot of fun stand fight. His stand de-ages anyone who steps in its shadow, a fate Polnareff suffers, which means we get to follow Child Polnareff and later Child Jotaro as they take out this comically evil child-hating man. There's some really effective horror in this arc too, where this woman who tries to help Polnareff gets reverted to a fetus. It's terrifying seeing Polnareff's reaction and him wanting to try to save her, but struggling being a child himself. Conceptually, I think Araki was on fire with writing this arc, and the next few arcs featuring the Daabi brothers. These are two fan favourite parts of Stardust Crusaders, seeing the crew fight in non-direct fights, playing poker or video games with their souls on the line. While I do think these are good arcs, I find them slightly overrated since up until now the cast has been engaged in games of wit with certain stands like the Sun, Geb and Bastet in trying to figure out their mechanics before engaging physically. The formula this time only really gets them to sit down and play a specific game, and often I feel like they're given a bit too much reverence for changing JoJo or something along those lines. Don't misunderstand me though, as these are very fun. Jotaro bluffing his way through poker is incredibly stupid, and Darby is a very charming character. It makes for a fun and unique arc. A Tomb with Terrence Darby is a bit too long and boring for me, although I do like the video game idea they play around with. The two arcs in between the Darbys are very strong as well. Boingo returns with Whole Horse for a kind of greatest hits collab that sees them run through a comedy of errors, and then Iggy gets an arc to himself against Pet Shop the Falcon, who wields the stand Horus that might be one of the most dangerous and busted stands of the part, being able to conjure ice out of thin air. There's a real sense of danger here, and I love the focus on it being about animals only, a bit of a throwback to Yoshihiro Takahashi's Ginga Nageriboshi Gin in a way. It also serves to ramp up threats because the final gauntlet before reaching Dio is by no means an easy one. At this point, the Crusaders have reached Dio's mansion and split up into two groups. Jotaro, Joseph and Kakyoin get enveloped in the second Derby fight, while Avdol, Polnareff and Iggy fight the much more deadly Vanilla Ice and Cream, and barely a few seconds into the encounter, Avdol is killed, erased in an instant by Cream. Maybe with his previous fake-out death, you expect him to come back in some way, like he uses Magician's Red to do something. Anything? But Avdol doesn't return, leaving Polnareff and Iggy to fight alone in potentially one of the most dangerous stands of the entire franchise. Cream is able to become a portal to the void, simultaneously making itself invulnerable, invisible, and able to kill anyone by consuming them or erasing body parts. Seeing Polnareff and Iggy fight back against all odds is one of the best parts of Stardust Crusaders. The hope, drains from them as they start on taking injury after injury. Despite this, Polnareff fights to the end, expecting death, hoping he can at least save Iggy. Iggy, though, the valiant pooch that he is, saves Polnareff instead, leading to the second death amongst our cast. Polnareff, through a second wind, not wanting to let his friend's sacrifice be in vain, musters the strength to take out Vanilla Ice through exploiting Cream's single weakness, its inability to see its surroundings, as well as the sun outside, which kills Vanilla Ice due to him being a vampire. The souls of Avdol and Iggy show themselves to Polnareff briefly before disappearing. All that's left now is Dio, which the fight with him and the world we would see throughout 1992, so stay tuned for the next video to see how this saga ends. Iggy, no! Iggy, you have the AirPods in! Take out the AirPods, Iggy! Iggy, take out the AirPods! Following on from his wrestling gag manga The Momotaro in 1991, we would see Makoto Newano return with Let's Play Soccer Takeda the Libero, lasting for 84 chapters and 9 volumes. This manga would see Danmaru Takeda, a first-year high schooler, transferred to Akebono High School in search of a football club, since he's insanely passionate about the sport. Like Newano's past work, it would combine sports elements with a lot of gags, which I think is pretty apparent based on Takeda's egg-shaped design. As well as this, it would take on the Shonen sports legacy of using special superpowered moves like Takeda's Bazooka Channel. So unlike something more grounded, it leaned fully into being a silly sports series, having all sorts of quirky characters appear, like a goalie who uses Mongolian chops to defend from the ball, and even Takeda's own father being an antagonist. While Takeda wouldn't be the most well-known series ever, it would still have its fans who remember these special moves and silly jokes to this day. And in 2002, Newano would publish Takeda the Libero 2002 World Flight Edition to celebrate the World Cup that year, which would be hosted between Korea and Japan. This sees the older Takeda, who's been lost in Africa playing football with the wildlife there, and then returning to the country to participate in the World Cup. Welcome, travelers, to the Outer Zone. Today, I will be your stalker and help guide you through this mysterious place, fraught with danger and horrors beyond mortal comprehension. Thankfully, we also have a handy guidebook to help us navigate the Outer Zone, which is 123 chapters long and 15 volumes by an experienced zone explorer named Shin Matsuhara. Originally, they published Outer Zone for a volume in the middle of 1991 within Weekly Shonen Jump, but it would resume and become a permanent series due to an unexpected wave of popularity, which would see it housed within the magazine for a few years to come. Outer Zone is a horror anthology series taking cues from other popular sci-fi or horror anthology TV shows like The Twilight Zone or Outer Limits, with it also most likely being influenced by the new and popular Yo ni mo Kimi o na Monogatari, the strangest story in the world, a similar Japanese TV show that debuted in 1990. This anthology approach to story was fairly popular around the world at the time. Comics weren't a stranger to it either, with stuff like Tales from the Crypt originating as a comic from the 1950s.
What's the matter with you? Want to keep that 90-pound corpse for the rest of your death? Keep pumping.
I think Tales from the Crypt is good to bring up as an example too, as its comic as well as later TV and film adaptations would have a narrator or host in the Crypt Keeper, and keeping that legacy alive, the Outer Zone would have one too, Misery. Misery would be a beautiful and enigmatic host. Not much is ever revealed about her other than that she has extensive knowledge of the Outer Zone, abilities or access to items that connect her to the Outer Zone, and a charming but also slightly scheming nature. You'll see her in pretty much every single chapter, usually at the beginning and end of stories, to bookend them and to pinpoint the theme or moral each tale is trying to convey. She's also known as a stalker, or her full name is often Misery Stalker, with her sometimes saying within the manga that she'll be your stalker as opposed to a guide. While this sounds creepy and in line with the work, it actually comes from Andrei Tarkovsky's 1979 film Stalker and adaptation of the novel Roadside Picnic. You might also know this as the book and film that inspired the game series Stalker. Mitsuhara basically took the idea of the zone from this story, complete with calling those who navigate it as stalkers, while applying this horror anthology element to it as well. I bring all of this up because I find it genuinely fascinating, and reading Mitsuhara's notes in the volumes where he gushes over his influences in film was super enjoyable to me as a fan of cinema. It also makes Outer Zone this weird work seeped in Western sensibilities. It's really unlike anything else in Jump and is a fun merger of cultures. These stories themselves vary in quality, and I'm sure a lot of them are heavily influenced by individual plots from the Twilight Zone or other anthologies or movies Mitsuhara likes. The first volume, for example, sees stories about an overbearing mother who believes her son is Satan. There's a story about a cursed shrunken head and someone using it to win big at a casino, and there's also one about a clown machine that offers cursed fortunes. One of the most memorable stories for me might be the one where this dad goes to put down the family dog. He then crashes his car and wakes up only to find that he's in a new reality where dog-like aliens have landed and begin persecuting humanity over the treatment of animals. Conceptually, there's a lot of fun and weird stuff here. Some stories will focus on horror elements, some on sci-fi. Misery might be a character now and then rather than just a host, and as it goes on, some stories get expanded on, like the Magic Doll storyline. This sees a police officer team up with a girl whose soul has been transported into the body of a small children's doll. It, like the rest of the Outer Zone, is very weird, but has this endearing quality to it, with Mitsuhara mentioning he created it to add levity to the series, and it was so well received it went on to have 8 whole parts throughout Outer Zone's run. Another interesting tidbit I found is that a chapter later on tackles the subject of Japan's harmful comic riots, a movement that had been brewing for years but came to a head in 1990 when Asahi Shimbun declared that comic books have a negative impact on children. This also involved singling out Shonen Jump for its increasingly violent works aimed at children. Jump was no stranger to controversies like this though, going back to its inception with the Harenchi Gakuen controversy that saw some parts of the public and the PTAs being against their content from the very beginning. It also reminds me of how comics came under threat in the 50s when the Comics Code Authority was formed, which aimed to censor comics and limited what they could depict. If any manga could tackle a subject like this, something as Western influenced and influenced by the very things the Comic Code Authority set out to ban initially, being grittier horror comics, it makes Outer Zone the perfect manga to talk about all of this. Even though Outer Zone lacks any popularity in the West, we have a considerable portion translated, a bit over 50 chapters. This is a series that's pretty unique and I think historically significant, so I heavily recommend giving it a look. It's also something I'd like to revisit at some point, as it's a work that's tied in with so many other things I'm interested in. Misery is also just a super cool character and I'd like to gush over her even more. While Outer Zone is somewhat a relic of the past, it did receive a sequel manga in 2011 that ran for a few more volumes called Outer Zone Revisited. It also received a novel, some audio readings, and a small stage play, which immediately intrigued me upon hearing about it. Stage play adaptations are fairly common amongst manga, but this was one for a relatively successful Shonen Jump manga from the 90s. Yet it was set to take place in 2020. Unfortunately, COVID happened. And yet, despite the pandemic and numerous cast members quitting the production, it ended up being held in 2023, which I know about because the actress for Misery, Kurara Shimagaki, has an extensive blog post about her thoughts behind the production, its postponement, and eventual completion. The play was also a mix of theatrical acting and digital elements, including comic parts by Matsuhira himself, who was involved. I got the sense from reading Kurara's article that she really loves Outer Zone, and it just made me happy knowing that all these older manga are still remembered and loved to such an extent over 3 decades after its release. Kurara's article will be in the description if you'd like to read it, and again I heavily recommend you take a trip to Shonen Jump's Outer Zone sometime in the future. Pennant Race Yamada Taiichi no Kiseki would be yet another new sports manga of the year, being created by Koji Koseki, who we covered all the way back in 1986 with Yamashita Taro, and similarly this would be another long-running baseball manga in the same style. It would last 126 chapters and 14 volumes, following Yamada Taiichi, the main character who loves baseball but isn't very good at it initially. Some differences between this and the prior Yamashita Taro are the main character having a twin brother who is on the same team as him and is a high school prodigy, and also real baseball teams being represented within the manga. I might be mistaken, but from what I can tell, a lot of focus was put into Taiichi getting better at baseball and being tutored by the team, becoming a prodigy by the end despite his short stature and immature appearance. Yamada Taiichi, like Yamashita Taro, captured the heart of its certain Japanese readers, perhaps due to it being an underdog story, or because it featured a more statistical and methodical approach to sports, which a lot of other sports series didn't approach. Time Walker Rei by Yuki Hidaka would last 23 chapters and 4 volumes, and would follow Setsuna Rei, a boy with the ability to time travel, which he uses to bring back works of art from the past to sell. But behind the scenes of his already shady business, he would also offer a service to go back in time and change the past of those who pay him. Initially, this would be very episodic, seeing Rei get approached by someone who has a major regret, wanting to change things, like this old woman in one chapter who wishes she ended up marrying someone back in her younger years. Rei then goes back in time and ensures the two get together properly. I think there's a lot of appeal here, with Rei potentially going to all sorts of different time periods, and people seem to really like the very human short stories it told. But about a volume or so in, the Ryu Jinju arc begins, which takes the rest of the series and sees Time Walker Rei become a battle manga, like a lot of other cancelled manga of the period. It's a shame, since the original concept sounds so interesting, and after its cancellation, Yuki Hidaka would leave Jump and go on to do a lot of licensed manga for things like the Atelier franchise, as well as Super Robot Wars. Don Vulcan by returning veteran Ryuji Tsujihara would last 11 chapters and 2 volumes, being a baseball manga at a time when the magazine was oversaturated with sports. It's a shame too, since the artwork and character designs really pop out to me. Unlike Pennant Race, it looks to focus on adult baseball, with its main character, Todoroki, also known as Don Vulcan, aiming to revolutionize Japanese baseball. Based on little tidbits I've read, Todoroki grew up in Dominica and returned to Japan, giving him an interesting heritage, but that wouldn't be enough to get readers interested, leading it to be one of the quickest cancellations Jump's ever seen. In my last history video, we covered the manga GP Boy, as well as McLaren, the Formula 1 racing team who partnered with Shonen Jump. This partnership would continue to blossom into 1991, leading to a second sponsored Formula 1 manga with F no Senkō Ayrton Senna no Chōsen by Hirohisa Onikubo, Katsuhiro Nagasawa, and Koyu Nishimura, lasting 16 chapters and 2 volumes. This would be a more biographical manga than GP Boy, focusing on Senna's career and real events and people that popped up throughout it, and his rise in becoming a top Formula 1 racer. The art style is very reflective of this, being some of the most realistic art Jump's ever seen, at least in its character portraits. If you'd like to know more about the collaboration between Jump and Formula 1 and some of its ties to Akira Toriyama, who was a huge fan of McLaren, Senna, and Formula 1 racing, I highly recommend you check out my last discussion about it in the 1990 history video. And since we're on the topic of Toriyama, we might as well check out Dragon Ball, as well as the most important event that occurred in 1991 for the magazine. Frieza stands above all, having ascended to his final form. He beats down the final resistance Vegeta can muster. There's only one person left who has a hope in stopping him, which would be Son Goku. 1991 would see the entirety of Goku vs Frieza play out, near 20 chapters of pure fighting between two individuals. It's a fight that ebbs and flows, with Goku seeming like he can beat him initially, but Frieza proves a tough adversary, beating him down, and even with the help of his allies, Piccolo, Krillin and Gohan, Frieza still remains alive, and in a shocking turn of events, Frieza annihilates Krillin right in front of Goku. This sparks something within him. The rumored Super Saiyan state we've been hearing all about from Vegeta for the past dozen chapters finally appears. Goku has attained it. His hair glowing bright yellow, his aura immaculate, something about him is clearly different. I think the anime gives this transformation much more gravitas, with it taking longer, letting the music, vocal grunts and tone carry just how impactful this transformation is. It's still really cool in the manga though, even if initially it was just a way for Toriyama to ink Goku's hair less. It isn't like there weren't transformations in Shonen Battle manga before this. Even Dragon Ball had them with the Great Ape forms, but something about Super Saiyan resonated with people. Goku against all odds, powering up to kick the ever-living shit out of Frieza is just cool. You want to cheer, it's all his emotion and training coming together so he can beat the bad guy. Even with Dragon Ball's penchant for resurrecting its characters, tension remains high. Krillin dying and Goku's other allies being threatened still presents a level of tangible danger that elevates this fight. It feels climactic all the way until the end, when Goku finally beats Frieza. The arc then ends dangling if Goku is alive or dead, and it's revealed he is alive somewhere in the vastness of space, but chooses not to come back and to train instead. Time passes once again, characters are revived, and Frieza is back already, now a cyborg with his father with him too? But don't worry, someone's here to stop him, but he's not Goku. Who the heck is this? Welcome to the next great saga of Dragon Ball, the Cell Saga. This must have been a real treat for readers at the time, having gone through a long epic fight and seeing the previous antagonist show up immediately to get trounced by some purple-haired time-traveling kid with the sword. It just sounds insane, who is also a Super Saiyan as well, by the way. Goku then returns shortly after, learning from Trunks about his true personage. He's Vegeta and Bulma's son from the future, who's here to warn the Z fighters of the past about androids who will descend on humanity 3 years from now. Everyone then trains for the very day, and 3 years pass, with 2 androids descending and attacking an Earth city, devastating it. They end up falling, with everyone grouping together to beat them, including a newly Super Saiyan Vegeta. But something's wrong. These aren't the androids Trunks was talking about. Trunks knew of 3 different androids, which will be our primary antagonists to kick off the 1992 batch of chapters. Dragon Ball is in full swing now. Super Saiyan power-ups are becoming common, androids are popping up everywhere, and soon we'll have another tournament arc, one of its most famous, the Cell Games. We'll have to wait a bit longer to cover all of that though, so see you next time for another exciting venture into the world of Dragon Ball when we get to the 1992 history video.
失敗は許されん。俺も燃えるぜ。
This year would also see the return of Shonen Jump video games with Famicom Jump 2 Saikyō no Shichinin. This would be the sequel to the game we covered in the 1989 video, and it would also be for the NES or the Famicom. A much shift in focus. Instead of having tons and tons of jump references, it would only focus on 7 of the magazine's major series at the time, letting you control the protagonists from each. Goku from Dragon Ball, Tarutaru from Magical Tarutaru, Maida Tyson from Rokudenashi Blues, Jotaro Kujo from JoJo, Ta-chan from Ta-chan, and Momotaro Ken from Otokojuku, as well as Ryotsu Kenkichi from Kochikame. Characters and enemies designed by the mangaka of each series would also be present, and it seems to be a more focused work, refining its RPG aspects, sprite work, and general ideas from the first. It also has a quirky but fun combat system, which I found a bunch of praise for. If you'd like a deep dive into the game, I've linked a wiki article going through it critically, as well as a long video which I use some footage for, which might give you a decent sense of what it might be like to play. 10 Yori Takaku, Higher Than Heaven was a horse racing manga that lasted 19 chapters and 2 volumes by Yuko Asami. This would follow a young jockey named Yuki who had previously lost their horse after an injury forced it to retire. Quitting the sport, Yuki lives on listlessly until meeting a new horse named Helios, who he's instantly enamored with. The two of them then form a bond and begin attending horse riding competitions with different clubs, rivals, and adventures popping up throughout its short run. Apparently, Yuko Asami really wanted to depict the special kinds of relationships that can develop between humans and animals with this manga, but struggled to balance all the elements, leading to it not lasting very long. They would, however, return in the future with a work featuring humans and animals that would reach a greater level of success, but we'll save that story for another day. Tengai-Kun's Brilliant Troubles by Sho Makuro would last 16 chapters and 2 volumes, being about the titular Tengai-Kun, a high schooler who wants to be seen as a hard-boiled and dependable person, but as the title of the work alludes to, he is troubled. Tengai, due to his strong constitution, secretes pheromones that would attract women to him, causing him much distress in his daily life, as he doesn't seem all that interested in romance. This would be the basis for a romantic gag manga where Tengai-kun attempts to help others while all these girls fall in love with him and get in his way. There's likely a mix of romance, action, and gag elements, and I really like how the author draws their characters. The female characters especially have a fun cuteness and roundness to them. Tennenshoku Danji Buray would last 13 chapters and 2 volumes by Kazuo Takahashi, which was actually creator of Yu-Gi-Oh! Kazuki Takahashi under a pen name, with this being his first Shonen Jump manga. Buray would be the titular character and a thief, selling stolen goods and being a no-good hitman with his naturally muscular body. One day he falls in love with a sister at a church, and to save face and to save the church, which needs funding, he declares himself a pro wrestler. Thus, a wrestling comedy would begin, seeing Buray bluff his way through bouts and gradually fall in love with the sport. To me, it looks quite a bit different from the Yu-Gi-Oh! I know and love, although there's glimpses of Takahashi's early Yu-Gi-Oh! Style here, especially in the villains. It's a shame that Buray has no translation, especially since Yu-Gi-Oh! Is an overwhelmingly popular franchise both in Japan and overseas. The manga might be the most neglected compared to the card game and anime though. Hopefully one day someone can translate this, or I will start an initiative to, since I love Takahashi's work and would love to read what he made before one of my favorite series. Arabian Story Lamp Lamp by Ken Obata, a pen name of Takeshi Obata of Death Note art fame, as well as Susumu Zendo on the story, will last 23 chapters and 3 volumes. This would be a fairly run-of-the-mill battle manga with an interesting setting, being a Middle Eastern fantasy inspired one where jinn have taken over the world, enslaving humanity. To break free of the jinn's chains and to save his sister, Toto decides to break free the gentle genie Rampo in order to help him, giving him a fighting chance against his demonic overlords. It's interesting to see Obata do art for a pure battle shonen series. In a way, I can see this as a proto-Ral grad, with Rampo and Ral being similarish characters. Both are girl-obsessed, love eating, and start the series sealed, but artistically it lacks the definition of his later style and is instead full of impact. There's a lot of good action shots and punches, and a more cartoonish aesthetic that I really dig. Rampo has a very fun and goofy design, missing his front teeth, and in some of the art I found it shows him making some great expressions. I really love his design when he's trapped in his lamp as well. It sounded like it wasn't very popular due to it being a bit too formulaic, especially in its fights, which were always solved by hitting harder than the enemy. If this sounds interesting at all, about half has been translated into English. These scans aren't great though, but will give you a sense of what it's all about. To finish off the year, let's quickly run over some developments in YuYu Hakusho. The manga actually began at the very end of 1990, so not much actually happened that year, but I opted to talk about the first chunk up until Yusuke gets resurrected anyway. This year though, YuYu Hakusho would really begin to take shape, introducing battle elements, which means we're introduced to Hiei and Kurama. Both are beloved characters, and I find it cool that our main 4 cast members are 2 delinquents, likely inspired by popular delinquent manga at the time, Hiei, who I believe is inspired by Dragon Ball and Vegeta, and Kurama, who is most definitely taking some kind of inspiration from Masumi Kurumada's Saint Seiya. It's an amalgamation of shonen stories and characters in the best sort of way, paying homage to what came before and then moving forward by making something new. Yusuke initially must hunt down Kurama, Hiei, and Goki, a 3rd demon, all of which have a stolen treasure on them which need retrieving. Goki is a pretty simple role. Kurama surprisingly involves no fighting, opting to tell a short and sweet story, much like those before in the initial arc. And then Hiei is a longer fight that has Keiko be captured and Yusuke on the ropes. But Kurama from earlier comes in to help, wrapping up the arc and planting seeds for their future partnerships. Before that though, Yusuke and Kuwabara go through a tournament arc to see who will become Genkai's pupil, with Yusuke coming out on top. After he returns from some training, all 4 cast members would then reunite and take on Mei's castle and its 4 beasts, which sees us go through a series of pretty classic battle shonen fights. To be honest, I don't have anything crazy to say about this portion of early YuYu Hakusho. It's fun, it feels very retro battle shonen, and I enjoyed watching it in the anime a ton when I was younger. Its relative simplicity to its later portions makes the series as a whole very interesting, but that's something I want to talk about more when we dive into its later arcs, I think. This year does end on a pretty exciting event though, the final arc of the year where Yukina gets rescued by Yusuke and Kuwabara, as it sees the introduction of the Toguro brothers. The build up to Toguro isn't very interesting, but I do want to point out that this arc does a few things I like. Togashi's art is as fantastic as always here, and I love how Yukina is depicted, as she's very gentle and there's a soulfulness to some pages she's on that contrasts with the rougher battle elements present. The seedier underbelly of Togashi's stories also appears here, with ties to the underworld and black market being brought up, something that gets touched on in later Yu Yu Hakusho as well as in Hunter x Hunter, and it serves to deepen the world building ever so slightly, giving the series a bit more edge. The first fight with Toguro is also great, building him up well as the main villain of the Dark Tournament arc, which we'll be covering in the next history video. And now that we've gone through every series, it's time to talk about the roster at the beginning and end of the year. As always, we start off with our frontrunners: Dragon Ball, City Hunter, Slam Dunk, Yu Yu Hakusho, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Sakigake Otokojuku, Dragon Quest Dai, Rokudenashi Blues, that's a lot of good manga, and we still have Magical Tarotaro, Video Girl Ai, and Hana no Keiji, which were all very popular. Kochikame, Ta-chan, Moero Onisan, and Shin-Yuki were also here to fill in for gag manga. Ace, Kickboxer Mamoru, and Hikaru Cha-Cha-Cha would also be here at the beginning of the year, acting as sports series that lasted a moderate amount of time. We're then left with Tenyan, a short historical manga about the famous Japanese author and naturalist Minakata Kumagusu. 1991 would bring a few big changes. City Hunter would finally end after 7 whole years in the magazine at the tail end of this year, and Sakigake Otokojuku would be another long runner and would end after around a 6-year run. The gag manga Moero Onisan would come to a close after 4 years, and the sports series Ace, Kickboxer Mamoru, and Hikaru Cha-Cha-Cha would all end, likely due to Slam Dunk's overwhelming domination, being the premier sport title of this time period. Tenyan would also end at the beginning of the year. While the magazine wouldn't fill back up with manga of the same notoriety, it did get some big hitters in the year prior in Slam Dunk and Yu Yu Hakusho, allowing 1991 to be a bit more experimental. Outer Zone is proof of this, a horror anthology series with Western sensibilities which managed to captivate readers and would stay around for a good few years. To offset the loss of all those sports series, we'd also see the debut of Pennant Race and Takeda Libero, which both did decently. We're then left with a handful of manga that would barely make it into next year. Buray, 10 Yori Takaku, Arabian Lamp Lamp, and Tengai-Kun. Coincidentally, all 4 mangaka, or at least someone involved in each work, would come back and make some kind of hit in Jump, be it Yu-Gi-Oh!, World Half, Hikaru no Go, or Hell Teacher Nube. I really like 1991 because we're back to sifting through some of Jump's more obscure and weirder manga conceptually. It also served to introduce a few newbies who, while their first or second pass at Jump didn't pan out, they would later return with something in the future, and introducing new blood to the magazine is always good. Even with the loss of big names like City Hunter and Sakigake Otokojuku, the magazine would remain strong thanks to the insane success of Dragon Ball, Slam Dunk, and also YuYu Hakusho, JoJo, Dai, and plenty of other manga. The magazine was still rising to its peak at this point in time, so we'll get to enjoy this ride of Golden Age Jump for a few more years to come. And that was Shonen Jump in the year 1991, a slightly shorter video than the last few, but things will likely get longer again as we're introduced to more and more big series in the coming years, so subscribe to make sure you don't miss the next video. I'd also recommend checking out past videos in this series if you haven't already, since I do something similar for each year of Jump, going all the way back to its inception in 1968, although those older videos aren't quite as polished as this one. I have a bunch of other videos covering manga as well, especially Shonen Jump's cancelled manga on the channel, which you may also be interested in too. Also, if you really enjoyed this video, please consider supporting me on Patreon. It helps a ton and pushes me to make better videos. You'll also get some neat perks like voting on polls, access to a Patreon only podcast, and at the $3 tier, you'll get a unique doodle like the following cool people: Kinocha, Jade, Kaizoku Gairu, Soraquil Zero, Holly the Apothecary, Mayu, It's Fakeo, Yellowtail, Lay Sloggett, Chris P. Bacon, Cho Henshin, Full Metal, Unquestionable, Weeby Boy, Wurzel, Balant, Cactus, Joni, City Name E, and also AB, Vako Draws, Otaku Gamer X, Deadpan, Shy Monkeys, Jonathan Dragonet, and John Sandfoot at the $1 tier. Thank you all so much for being patrons, and as always, thank you so much for watching. Remember to be kind and take care.